Okay, great. Good afternoon, ladies and Dr. Chisholm. Welcome to our first technology-related Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Michelle Stewart-McKoy, and today we're going to be looking at Moodle's lesson feature and how we can use it to support our students and provide feedback. So, but before I dive right in, let me just take a quick minute to acknowledge Dr. Chisholm, the head of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And Dr. Chisholm, could you please bring a word of greeting, please?
Okay, good afternoon, colleague, Mrs. Stewart-McKoy. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's nice to be here. But I think this is the second meeting for this new semester.
Yes, but the first technology related.
But the first technology seminar or webinar. I think we have a little problem sometimes, we refer to these online activities. We continue to say seminar, webinar, workshop, but I suppose in time we will find a good balance. So welcome to all, and it's really great that we can have you here, and we really hope we will all learn a lot, including myself, about how we can use Moodle to engage our students in very meaningful ways and advance learning.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Chisholm. I'd also like to acknowledge Miss Barkley. Miss Barkley is our administrative support, and I think some of you have already met her. Miss Barkley, I'm not putting you on the spot if I ask you to turn your camera on. She'll be helping us this afternoon in terms of setting up the breakout rooms, indicating questions or raised hand. Miss Barkley, can you?
Hi.
Well, I'm not seeing you. The camera seems to be acting. There you are.
There we go. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be sharing in this space with you. And if you need anything as we progress through the session, you can always send it in the chat. All right.
Thank you so much, Ms. Barkley. All right, so I am going to be sharing my screen. I just want to point out that I am using two monitors. So if you see me turn away, it's because I'm doing much of the attention is being paid to the second monitor. As Ms. Barkley pointed out, you can post to the chat. I won't be seeing your hands, and I won't be seeing the questions so easily. So Ms. Barkley will be assisting us. So let me just go straight into slideshow mode. And so you know that this particular session, we're looking at using Moodle lesson feature. We have already done the introduction. This session is in two parts. So in this particular session this week, we're going to be looking at the theoretical foundations that drive what it is that we're doing. Going to talk a little bit on the universal design for learning, UDL, and how the Moodle lesson supports that. And then we're going to, if time allows, we're going to begin planning, designing what our lesson would look like before we start creating it on the Moodle platform. All right, so let's just explore what this is all about and how it works. Please remember, it's an experience where we all engage with the content. So at any point, if you need to ask a question, please raise your hand, make a comment, and we'll address it. All right. So what exactly is Moodle? On our VLE, there are resources and there are activities. The Moodle lesson is an activity. So we can use it to engage our students and ask questions and get feedback and so forth. It is interactive. It's an adaptive learning tool. And so it allows us as facilitators to do a number of things. We can present content in different ways, very flexible ways. We can add learning experiences so that our students can engage. We can check our students' understanding through different types of questions. And there are some terms that I will be using that when we actually start building, you will recognize that, oh, we used this already, we didn't use that. All right. We also can use the Moodle lesson to guide students through different learning paths and branches, something similar to choose your own kind of adventure. And then, of course, we can use it for immediate, personalized, and targeted feedback. Okay, and so we're going to be focusing on the feedback aspect as we work through building our lesson. Okay, now feedback for us as facilitators, feedback is one of the most powerful tools that we can have as educators. And so there are a number of persons, Hattie and Tim and Timperley Williams in 2024, I think Henderson and his partners in 2021. And there are others that tell us that effective feedback can double the speed of student learning. But not all feedback is created equal, because there are times when feedback is vague, feedback is delayed or generic. So students are more confused or unmotivated. Now, I know that I have not been perfect in giving timely feedback, and that is something that I am working on. And so I would like to share with us some handouts. You don't have to read them now. Some readings on effective feedback, what makes feedback engaging, and so forth. So Miss Barkley will share that in the chat. So you can hold on to those, go through it. Very interesting reading, not very long. All right. Now, when feedback is specific, when feedback is timely, when feedback is actionable, it supports learning through self-regulation. It enhances our students' performance. Okay, so essentially, the Moodle lesson has what we call content pages and question pages. It facilitates learning paths and self-paced learning, and it provides students with personalized, with targeted, with immediate feedback. All right, so let me just move on. When we think about the structure of the Moodle lesson, we now know that one of the core components is what we call content pages. Think of your content page as your traditional lecture slide, but with interactivity. Okay, so the content pages will display information. It will support multiple media formats, so you can add audio, video, hyperlinks to images and so forth. Okay, the content page also, if we set it up that way, we can embed content from other places. So there is the thought that we try to keep the students within the VLE so that they're not distracted. So we can actually use the embedded codes into our lesson to bring the content right there into the lesson. We can add navigation links and buttons to direct the students where to go, when, and how. And then, of course, within the content pages, we can also have inline questions. So these are not focused question pages, but within the content, you can ask a question or two, maybe a reflective question or something for them to think about moving on. So we have content pages. The next thing that we have as a part of the structure are question pages. Now, the question pages are like checkpoints. They test for understanding, they guide students' learning path, they provide feedback, targeted, immediate, or personalized, and they support multiple question types. When we go in, you'll see the different types. So you will have multiple choice questions where you can have a single response or multiple responses. There is a true false setup. There are short answer or closed test. There is numerical, there's matching, and there are essay types. So if you have extended writing, you can set up your lesson using that as well. You could provide a rubric or a summary of what the response may look like so that student can continue moving through. Or you can indicate that this particular response will be marked and students can come back and take a look at it. Okay, and then what you will hear me talk about every now and again are jumps. No, jumps are simply what does a student do after going through this content. So a jump is simply moving from where you are to somewhere else, okay? And the third core component of the Moodle lesson would be your navigation elements, which are very important because we talk about the Moodle lesson allowing different pathways. So the navigation elements become critical as a component. And when we talk about navigational lessons, these are the things that make each lesson unique. Okay, so the navigation elements would have things like forward or backward progression. So this is where the student move forward through the lesson, or the student goes back to review or to redo a question. Then there is what we call the conditional branching. So they're depending on how the students respond, they can then decide where they want to go next. There are what you call cluster pages, where you have a series of questions together. And then, of course, you have what we call branched tables. This is just setting up a menu with the different choices. And then, of course, your jumps are where you move to different sections depending on where you want to go or where the teacher is directing you to go. So when we think about the makeup of the Moodle lesson, we think about three core things: content pages, we think about question pages, and we think about navigation elements. Are you still with me? Everybody still with me? Not hearing, but I assume. All right.
Yes, we're still here with you.
Okay, great. Now, in addition to the core components that make up what a Moodle lesson is and what makes it different from a file or a book, we have what we call the settings. And there are three types of settings that I'm going to just quickly look at. There are the general settings, the grade settings, because we have grades and feedback that we give. And then there's what we call the flow control. How does the student control how he or she moves through the lesson that we have put up? So when we talk about the general settings, and we will see them when we go in to build our lesson, we have our progress bar. You can decide if you want the students to see their progression as they go along in percentage, or in a bar that says X percent, X lessons, X component completed, or X percent of the lesson is completed. We can decide as a part of the general settings if we want to show an ongoing score. So as students go through the content and have a question to verify how understanding and so forth, we can decide if we want to put a grade. So if they did 2 or 3 questions, we can decide that we will show the scores that they have gotten, and we'll keep that going. We can determine under the general settings whether or not we're going to limit the number of attempts that students have, or we're going to make it be an unlimited number of attempts. Now, of course, this is dependent on what it is that you're doing. If you're using the lesson as a graded activity, you have to think about whether or not it's practical to have unlimited attempts. If you're using it for review purposes, sure, unlimited attempts work and work well. And then, of course, there are things like whether or not you're going to put a time limit on what they do, whether or not you're going to add a password, little things like that. After that, we can then look at the different grade settings. So in grade settings, we can decide whether or not we want this to be a practice lesson, or we want this to be a lesson where a grade is assigned and is recorded in the grade book. We can decide if we want to customize the scoring that is there. So we can decide if we're going to use a competence or a scale, or if we're going to use a rubric, or if we're going to put points so students can see the points. In the grade settings, we also think about whether or not they can attempt any particular question multiple times. So we can decide they will only get one opportunity to the question, or they can do it as often, or it's really up to you when you're setting. And of course, this means that it's on the purpose, why exactly it is that you're setting up this. We can decide the number of questions that we put in and the maximum number of answers. So, sometimes you see some multiple choice responses and they have 3, response A, B, and C, and then you have the standard, which are 4, and then you have some that have 5 or more. So you can decide how many number of answers you'll put together for your questions, and this you do in the grade settings. And then the third setting that we have is what we call the flow control. And this is where you determine whether or not you want the students to review what they have done. You decide if you want to have a try again button, so students can decide to try again, or they can ignore that and move on. Of course, we talked about the number of attempts, and for flow control, we can also determine what action is taken after the answer is correct. So do we want, after they have gotten the question that we have posed correctly, do we have them proceed to the next content page, or do we take them to a page that shows some kind of feedback, or do we take them to a question page? So we can make that kind of determination, which impacts the flow of the lesson. And then, of course, we can also determine whether or not we show all the pages in our lesson, or we show one page at a time, or we show 2 or 3 pages at a time. So these are some of the things that we think about long before we start building our lesson that we need to take into consideration. Any questions where the structure and the options, the settings are concerned? Any questions? We're
No
good with the
questions from my side.
Okay, great. Anything in the chat, Ms. Barkley?
No, not at the moment.
All right, great. So I did say that we're going to touch a little bit on universal design for learning. I don't know how many of you remember that we had a visiting scholar, a Fulbright scholar, Dr. Jane Maguire, and she had taken us through a few sessions on the whole universal design for learning. Now, I'm not going into this too much. I'm just touching on it. And what I have done is that I have provided a basic summary sheet from the CAST.org website that I am asking Ms. Barkley to share with you. And we'll take a quick look at it. But the whole understanding of the whole idea of understanding universal design learning has to do with the fact that, and it's known as UDL for short, that UDL is about benefiting all students. So it's a framework that rejects the one size fit all. It doesn't believe in that blanket approach to engagement. And so it ensures that when we design our learning experiences, these learning experiences work for all our students, regardless of their ability, their background, their learning preferences. So essentially, that is what UDL, the UDL principle is about. Now, 3 key brain networks are involved in learning. So there is the why of learning, and this has to do with engagement. And so the UDL principle says that there should be multiple means of engagement, different ways of engaging the students. All right, so this has to do with the why. And then there is the what of learning, which looks at how do we represent, different ways of representing the information that we're going to share with the students. And then there is the how, multiple ways of action and expression. How do the students get to respond to a question that we have, or a question that we want to share? So I'm just going to quickly bring up the site. Oh, great. So this is the site that most persons tend to make reference to, CAST.org, and they have quite a bit of information on the different aspects, the science of learning, how it is they come about with the different components. And then they have 3, I think this particular one that I'm going to share with you is the third poster that looks at the UDL principle. So if you go to cast.org and click on that little plus sign at the top, it will bring up the different elements. And so they will start out by telling you that the whole idea of UDL is about learner agency, okay? And then they break down more details than I have the time for us to go through. They take us through, you know, what it is when we're designing multiple means of engagement, of representation, of action, and expression. So this is a very useful tool for us to hold on to. And I have asked Ms. Barkley to share this summary sheet. But beyond the summary sheet, there is quite a bit on the site that you can go through and look at what exactly they deal with. So for each element, they have broken it down and they have given you more details where that is concerned. All right, so that is just a little quick peek into the whole idea of universal design. I'm sorry about that. I got bumped. What was the last thing you heard? What was the last thing you heard from me? Hello?
You were saying when we go on the page, we could check.
Oh my. So I've been talking all that time and you weren't hearing anything? All right, let
Oh,
me
no, Michelle, you went through you showed us the website and
Yes.
you were coming to the tail end when you were scrolling down and that's where you dropped off. So
Oh, so it's not so bad.
no, not at all.
Okay, great. So we looked at the whole idea of, you know, just a synopsis of what the universal design for the UDL principle is about. And so I was going to take us through how does the Moodle lesson support that. So let me just backtrack a little bit so that we can go to that. So when we talk about multiple means of engagement, we're talking about how exactly do we motivate our students through the feedback, different feedback strategies when we create the lessons. So we can do so by giving them choices in the learning path that they take. We can set up progression bars so that they can see advancement. We can have the motivation completion aspect, so we can have different types of motivation so they can engage with that. We can have visual feedback or audio feedback or the traditional text-based feedback. We can set up conditional path for personalized learning. So if you are already comfortable here, you may want to start here kind of thing. We can determine how they progress. So when we start setting it up, you'll see exactly what it is that I mean. So that first page, students can decide that they want to start with a question, or they want to test themselves, or they want to jump to, they may figure that they know enough about this, so they want to jump to a particular content page. It doesn't matter how you set the pathways, they should all lead you to a particular end based on your learning outcomes. All right. We can also have adaptive difficulty. So we can set different content or question pages that is based on how well they responded to what came before. All right. And of course, we talk about the interactive aspect and so forth. Now, when we talk about multiple means of representation, this has to do with how the feedback that we have is delivered to the students, whether written, verbal, or video based. And so within our content pages, we can have different text formatting options. We can have the multimedia. We can have alternative formats. We can have different question types that also have different multimedia aspects, visual, audio, or a combination. And then, of course, for our feedback options, we can use our text and image feedback or video explanations or audio support. And finally, when we talk about the multiple means of action or expression, this has to do with how do we get the students to respond to and act upon the feedback that we share. So we can do that by giving them multiple response types, multiple choice, essay type, file submission, audio recording, and so forth. And then, of course, we can give them different explanation styles, text, audio, video. And finally, we can give them different navigation options. So we can have them go from in a linear progression, step A, step B, step C, or we can decide that we want them to branch, choose your own adventure. So you start here and then you decide that you want to go here. And based on your responses there, it branches. So there are a number of different outcomes that you can set up for the students. And we can also have multiple means of expressions and action in how we set up our navigation options. So we can decide that they can have branched tables, we can have different jump options, and then jump to. So they jump to an unseen page, or they jump to a question page, or they jump to another content page. Now, we're focusing on feedback. And so when we set up our question pages, there are different types of feedback that we can engage the students with. And here, I mean, they may be called by different names, but essentially we have the verification, the elaboration, the strategic approach, the constructive approach, and the metacognitive. Now, what do these mean? Anybody want to pick any one of them and give a shot? What exactly is a verification type of feedback, and why would we need it?
Can I go to metacognitive since I think I know
Yes.
that one?
Yes, you can.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I think that means reflective, meaning getting the student in some way to kind of think about the learning experience, the teaching experience, and how it affected them, how they benefited, how they grew. I thought a reflective piece about that,
That is so
about
correct.
whatever it is. Yeah.
That is so correct. So we prompt them for reflection and self-assessment. And we tend to use this particular one when we have complex problem solving, case analyses, and things like that. So I tend to use an example of a course. It's fictitious, game-based learning in the Caribbean. So I may say to my students, before you move on to the next section, why did you choose this particular approach? Which prompts them to know, do some quick reflection in order to respond. What assumptions influenced your design? How do you think student might respond if you made this change? So yes, you're correct. Metacognitive has to do with reflecting and self-assessing. Anybody want to take any other?
Would verification giving positive commendation, encouragement, and needs be corrections along the line where necessary?
Yes. So verification is, well, it confirms if it's correct or it's not. So when you think about it, you want to verify, you want to find out if it's A or if it's B. And so we tend to use verification when we're doing quick knowledge checks. When we have multiple choice questions, we want to say something like, yes, gamification is indeed different from game-based learning, or not quite. Let us take a quick look at the key differences between gamification and game-based learning. So yes, verification has to do with double checking if it's correct or if it's incorrect. Anybody else? So we have 3 more left. You don't all have to talk at once. We have elaborative, strategic, and constructive. Any takers?
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm wondering, because of elaborate, if it could possibly mean that it's detailed feedback with perhaps, extensive explanations of what went wrong or what was handled well.
There
So
you
it
go.
explains strengths and weaknesses of the responses.
I don't know why you all sound so hesitant, You are correct. So when we talk about elaborative, we are going beyond just verification. This is where we are now saying why it is correct or why it is incorrect. And so we provide additional information, we elaborate. And so we tend to use this for complex concepts. We use it for important foundation information that we want our students to have. So we want to say something like, yes, your response show that you understand the point system in game-based learning or in gamification. Additionally, you could consider the research on Carl Kapp, who looks at the whole idea of combining points with achievement. So you're elaborating. You can say something that like, while leaderboard does indeed motivate some students, research within the Caribbean context shows that the collaborative achievements often work better because, and then you may give a short reason why, and then prompt the student to consider looking at this particular area. So yes, that's elaborative. What about strategic and constructive?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
I share with constructive in the collaborative and what we feel are also constructive feedback.
When I'm not hearing you clearly.
Okay, are you hearing me now?
That's a little better.
Okay, so I was saying with constructive, I'm coming from just general knowledge in terms of maybe it relates to like identifying something specifically that needs to be exploring to. So you give a direct explanation on certain topic. Or maybe a response that was given and to kind of indicate what needs to be improved in a very specific and detailed way so that they can go ahead and fix it.
All right, so I keep hearing specific, so it means that you're on the right track, but your audio to me is still very choppy. I'm not sure how it is to the rest of us. But because I heard specific a number of times, it seems as if you're well on the right track. So yes, the constructive is where we're providing specific suggestions for improvements. So if the students are doing a project, if they're doing an essay, if they give an essay response, you can then say that, gamification, and I'm using gamification and game-based learning because, as I said, it's my sample course. Design does effectively use these points that you have mentioned. To strengthen it, you could consider adding the narrative elements. From local culture, you can consider adding collaborative challenges because we see where students like competing. You could consider creating smaller milestone achievements and so forth. So that is the constructive where you give specific suggestions. And the last one is the strategic feedback. Who wants to take that one? All right, no takers. I'll go with that one. It's simply you suggesting different approaches and methods or techniques for improvement. So you're not necessarily highlighting what is correct or what is what specific areas are to address, but you say something like, well, you could consider approaching this from a design based aspect, or you could consider reaching out to local groups to get feedback. So you simply give them some comments that will lead them in the right direction, but you're not verifying, you're not giving specific, and you're not asking for them to self-assess or to reflect. There are some experts who will say that strategic can be subsumed under constructive. And again, it depends on what it is you're doing. I see where strategic feedback could easily lend its, be a part of constructive feedback. All right. Okay. So we're going to start a little practical work here. I've been doing a lot of talking, and I want us to go into rooms and discuss something for a little bit. So in order for us to prepare for next week's session, and I'm so looking forward to next week's session, we need to plan our lesson, our Moodle lesson, before we actually start building it. So if we think about it in the same way that you have, what you call those people who build houses, architects. So in the same way that you have architects who work with their blueprints, and they examine, they build, they put it together, and you know, you discuss it and so forth. It's the same thing that happens when you're building your lesson. You have to think of how exactly will it look? What will the jump points look like? What content pages will I have? What question pages will I have? What is the purpose for this particular lesson? Do I need to use this lesson feature? Can I use the book resource? Will that do better? Can I simply upload a file? So there are a number of things that you have to think about. I'm going to stop sharing a little bit so that I can find the example that I had put together, and I will share that with you before I put us in groups to do a little bit of discussion. So let me see if I can find so I have found it, and I'm going to share with you. So again, this is a sample from a fictitious course, and this is me planning before I start putting my lesson together. So I have my course title and code. I have the particular topic that I am going to be using, designing the lesson feature for. I have my learning outcomes. So at the end of this particular lesson or tutorial, if you will, the students will define gamification. The students will identify elements of gamification suitable for Caribbean classrooms. They will analyze cultural considerations when implementing gamification. Now, it is very important that you start with your learning outcomes, because the learning outcomes will be the driving force behind how you develop your lesson and how you consider the activities that you're putting and the type of questions that you pose. So you have to take a keen look at your learning outcomes before you begin. Now, I have a very basic structure. CP simply means content page. So I have content page 1, what is gamification? And my question page is a knowledge check. And then based on the knowledge check, they would review what is gamification if needs be. My second content page is gamification elements, and this has 3 different aspects: points and reward, narrative and storytelling, progression and levels. And then there is a question page 2, which looks at a quick check on the elements. And if they get less than 80%, this is me setting it up so that if they get less than 80%, they would then have to review the gamification elements. Of course, they would have the options to jump. It depends on what it is that I'm doing. And so I have put up my different content pages and my question pages, just a very basic layout to make it clearer so that it's easier for me when it's time for me to build. I then have what I call my detail pages. So I list all the different aspects. So pretend that this is a class that you're teaching and you would have prepared your PowerPoint presentation, and each PowerPoint presentation has these different things. All right, so I have my different areas that I'm going to cover. These are all content pages. I put what the content will be dealing with. I have my multimedia that I'm going to be putting in, because remember, we can fill in our multimedia within our lessons. And then I have the jumps Okay, where will these, after they have done this, where will it take them? So this is simply laying out how they do what. And then we have the question details. So all of these are question pages, and these are my question pages. And my jump logic says that if they get it correct, they will go to the second content page. If they get it incorrect, they have the option to review. So this simply builds the flow so that it's clear to you what happens where. And this is very important for us to do before we actually start building our lesson. And I have our multimedia. What will be the different multimedia that I will put on each? Try not to make all your content pages be text only, because we are trying to adhere to the UDL principles. And so we want to have multiple means of representation and engagement for the students. All right. So I simply have all of them and why, what purpose they will be serving. And then I have my feedback strategy. What are the key points? What is the different type of feedback that I'm going to be using? And for the content, is it that I'm going to have correct, incorrect with explanation, detailed explanation with examples, that sort of thing. And then finally, I wrap this up with the UDL checkpoints. So I list my multiple means of engagement, my multiple means of representation, and my multiple means of action and expression. All right. Any questions? Because now you're going to do this. Any questions? Great. So there is a template. Don't worry, I won't have you start from scratch. There is a template, a Word document that I'm going to ask Ms. Barkley to share. I'm also going to ask her to create 3. I had said originally that we could have 4, depending on how many persons come. So we'll do three breakout rooms. And we will begin the process. So we won't be able to complete it, but we'll begin the process so that we can come back and have a quick talk. In the next session, we'll take a look at what it is that we have done before we move into building. So Ms. Barkley, if you could create 3 breakout rooms and give us 10 minutes, please, and share the template so people can think about how they would build. So you will have to, I can share the sample. Let me share the sample. So I'll just put it in the chat. Someone is asking if you can share the sample. So let me just pull that from my folder, completed. All right, here we go. Please let me know if you can access it. I just shared that in the chat. All right, so armed with your sample and your lesson planning template, you have 10 minutes to think about a lesson. Now, I know that you come from different faculties and different units. So we can work with one area and you build your template so that when we come back to the main room, we can have a quick discussion about how you found the process, what the thinking was, and so forth. So Ms. Barkley, are you ready to put them in the room?
Yes, rooms are created and I'm going to open them now.
All right, thank you ever so much. And then I'm going to ask you to pause the recording until they come back so we don't have 10 minutes of empty space.
Sure.
All right, I see that you're all coming back. And I came to the room, I saw the mics very much engaged. Now that was just whetting the appetite because we only had an hour for the entire session. But any comments on the process so far? One person from each room can quickly let us know what happened in your room. Any volunteer from any of the rooms?
All right, so I'll volunteer from my room. I think the information was pretty clear, but I think we just need a little bit more time to put our thoughts together. And I don't know, perhaps the next session we could, regroup and perhaps do the activity the way you wanted us to do it. But I think we have an understanding based on what was discussed and what was shared But it's just a matter of, putting stuff together right now.
The time, yes. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. What group were you in?
I was with Billy Thomas was in my group.
Or you were in
So,
room
yeah.
3? You were
Room
in room
3,
3.
right, room
All
3.
right. Okay, room 2, room 1?
I am from room 1.
Yes.
We were a little unclear. Were we designing a lesson for students or student teachers?
Oh, so these would be your students. So even if they're student teachers, they would still be in the role of students. So you'd be
Well, meaning we wouldn't be teaching a student teacher how to add it. We chose the math as a subject.
but
And
that's fine.
addition, but we wouldn't be teaching the teacher how to add more, teaching her how to develop a lesson on addition.
That's
So we
fine.
weren't sure. Oh, we could have chosen either one.
Yes.
Okay.
So
And
that is
then
what, yes, go ahead.
we came from different backgrounds. So we spent most of the time just trying to, the time was the biggest issue. We never got very far. There was too much to think about in the
Yes.
time.
Yes, the time I said to Miss Barkley that this really should have been a 2-hour session. But what let me just take room 1, and then that was room 1. Room 2, somebody from room 2? Anybody from room 2? Room 2 had Anika and Grace and
Room 2,
yes.
we were trying to feel our way through, miss. And then
It's all like my students. All right, so that's fine. I acknowledge that we didn't have enough time, but what we will do, we don't want to use take too much time out of the practical session to be working on filling out the document. So what I'm going to ask Ms. Barkley to do is to just share the documents again, and you would spend some time thinking about the area that you teach. You have the sample, and then you can think about how you want yours. And this is a takeaway task that you would actually do that. Come with a template of sorts so that we can build our lesson for the next session. All right. So I know that we started a little bit late, and so I am just going to do a quick recap of today's session. All right. So let me just do a recap for today's session. All right. So, I want to say thank you very much for coming. And today we're looking at the power of the Moodle lesson. And in this particular session, we focused on the theoretical aspect, looking at what exactly the Moodle lesson is, the core components of it, what the different settings are really. And then we look at the UDL principle, the Universal Design for Learning principles, and how the Moodle lesson supports the principles. We looked, because we're focusing on feedback and how we can get feedback. We looked very quickly at the different types of feedback that we can use when we're putting in our feedback options to the students. So we know that we have the verification, the elaborative, the strategic, the constructive, and the metacognitive, and they would serve different purposes depending on what it is that we want to do. We whetted our appetites a little bit in trying to fill out a template, what it would look like before we start building the lesson. And so my charge to you is that you complete that lesson template. So you focus on your session and you complete the template so that when we meet next week, if you're here with us, we will have a smoother process of actually building the session. Okay, so for next session, we're going to transform the lesson, which is right now very static, into something that's dynamic and multimedia and interactive and beautiful for our students. And we're going to test it as students to see exactly how this could engage our students. And you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, why is it I've never thought of this all along? So we're going to be doing that in next week. Just a few things I want you to remember. Planning is always very good. It's ideal. You have to think about your learning outcomes. Remember that the Moodle lesson is another tool, just another tool. And so you have to use it strategically. Ensure that the feedback that we use, next week, I'm going to share a feedback bank that you can think about pulling different feedback types to share with your students. You may or may not find it useful, but I'll share that next week. And so we're going to think about how exactly do I engage my students? What types of feedback do I give while I build this lesson? And then, of course, we're not just building content for our students, we're building an unforgettable learning experience for them. And so if we do it right, using the Moodle lesson, which is such a dynamic tool, we can facilitate those who are struggling, those who are comfortable, those who only need to practice. We can actually reinforce the universal design for learning principles, and we can meet all our students. So I want to thank you very much for coming. I enjoyed the session. I won't be talking as much next week. And I don't know if there are any last words, any last comments, but Ms. Barkley will be sharing the evaluation sheet. We always welcome your feedback. And I look forward to us working through our lessons in the next session. So that's it from me. You are most welcome. Please make sure that you have the documents that were shared in the chat. And Ms. Barkley, you can stop the recording when you